Pens and pencils down right this instant. Class is about to begin. You enter here with minds of pudding, but you will leave with steel traps. Today's curriculum, Neil Gaiman, and I don't want to hear any laughter about that name. I have never laughed at another man's name, or my name isn't Gaylord Glasscock. Very well then, turn your attention to the monitor, as class is about to begin.
Neil Gaiman is a successful, award-winning, popular writer of comic books, novels, and TV episodes. And while there is plenty of literary merit to his signature work in comics, Sandman, I'm going to cover something else that hasn't been covered as much. I'm talking about the 8-issue series he did for Marvel called 1602, which came out in late 2003 through 2004. On this channel, we frequently look at the tropes that comic creators utilize regularly, which forms their style. But 1602 intentionally uses several other tropes to create a unique, layered story, and perhaps more importantly, brings back postmodern storytelling tropes in a post-9/11 world. First of all, postmodern storytelling primarily involves two elements: mixing the light and the serious, and mashing up genres. It tends to ask philosophical questions like the nature of existence. After the US was attacked on September 11, 2001, this kind of storytelling was briefly not in vogue. Instead, we had a lot of stories that dealt with trauma. Keeping in mind that literature and comics tend to take a couple of years to respond to cultural shifts, examples of this include the following mainstream comics events: Avengers Disassembled, where the Avengers fell apart as a team; House of M, where the vast majority of mutants were eliminated; Civil War, where the superhero community fought one another whether they should register with the government following an explosion that left school children dead; Identity Crisis, in which Elongated Man's wife is revealed to have been raped and murdered; and Infinite Crisis, in which the heroes of DC Comics are mistrustful of one another, and a parallel version of Superboy kills several superheroes and destroys the Justice League's base. Gaiman himself stated in his afterword to the hardcover collection of 1602 that he was intentionally trying to avoid writing about such traumatic events. His afterword reads in part, quote, "September the 11th happened, and while I wasn't certain what I wanted in the story, I suddenly knew what I didn't want. No planes, no skyscrapers, no bombs, no guns. I didn't want it to be a war story, and I didn't want to write a story in which might made right, or in which might made anything." He thought about this a lot while on a trip to Venice, Italy, and realized how close he felt to the past. He decided to create a story that played into that. I'll only really discuss some of the first couple of issues of 1602 so that the story itself isn't spoiled in case you're interested. But the core idea is that many of the recognizable heroes from Marvel Comics are appearing in 1602 England, but they're era-appropriate versions. For instance, Queen Elizabeth is in her final days and summons her spy master, Sir Nicholas Fury, to protect a powerful object alongside her ally Donnell, as well as tasking Dr. Stephen Strange with figuring out why there are mysterious red storms in the skies and seemingly more mutants appearing, or, as they are called in this story, witchbreed. There's a lot to unpack with just the plot. The plot itself involves several threats to the stability of England. There's the fact that Elizabeth is on her deathbed, as in real life. There are the mysterious storms, which are connected to the fact that Marvel superheroes are appearing about 400 years too early. We have the real-life threat of King James in Scotland and his hatred of witchbreed. This all mixes not just the light and the serious, as in postmodern fiction, it also mixes in historical fiction tropes. We have a grounded take on England, with real-life historical figures interacting with fictional ones. Real-life events, such as the gunpowder plot that took place in 1605, are mentioned. The story uses historical evidence of James possibly being both a drunkard and a homosexual in its portrayal. But even more importantly, It bends his religious intolerance, which in part led to the formation of the United States, and pushes that same hatred onto the mutants of the X-Men, here called the Witchbreed. It's a playful but deep and honest use of historical fiction tropes. While some of the superheroes like Doctor Strange and Nick Fury are obvious, other interpretations are surprisingly subtle. The Queen's ally, Donald, is an older man who is a leader in the Templar Knights. This is an analog for Donald Blake, the original human form of Thor in the comics. The Grand Inquisitor of the Spanish Inquisition is part of the story, and ultimately, we learn that he is Magneto, hiding his true nature and using his position to protect Witchbreed where he can from persecution. Meanwhile, a character that figures prominently into the plot is Rajas, who dresses in Native American garb and protects Virginia Dare. Virginia Dare was actually the first person born to colonists in the New World in the first successful colony, Roanoke. But Rajas is not Native American. He's blonde-haired and blue-eyed. He's actually Steve Rogers, Captain America. He's often portrayed as a man out of time because he was a World War II soldier that was frozen in his final days of the war and woke up in modern day. This story subverts that and reveals that this version of Steve Rogers is also a man from another time, but not the past. There's yet another type of trope that appears in 1602. There are Elizabethan literature tropes. The Elizabethan era was a period that fell in love with flowery, verbose language. We can see plenty of that style of speech throughout the issues, but one of the more prominent examples is the character of Matthew Murdock, an analog for Daredevil, who travels about as a bard singing songs. Poetry, sonnets, stanzas, and dramatic blank verse were all popular in this era, and Murdock best exemplifies this, such as when he performs a song about the Fantastic Four. It was also a period where stories involving satire, adventure, and discovery were important. As mentioned earlier, the depiction of King James meets the criteria of satire based in truth, but every shot of him has a goblet of wine in hand. And of course, the entire story is one of adventure and discovery, trying to figure out why the storms are appearing. As for Gaiman's personal tropes, the story surprisingly subverts most of them. Many of his stories involve a young man in over his head in a fantastical world, frequently with a young female sidekick, but this story tends to focus on several adults. He has works with ancient angry gods, evil cults, and surreal horror in American Gods, Neverwhere, Sandman, and more. But the threats in 1602 tend to originate with men, and the main thrust of the story is figuring out the mystery of what's going on. If you've never read a Neil Gaiman novel or Sandman, then 1602 might be an intriguing entry into his work. It's a self-contained story, but it does rely on an understanding of Marvel Comics to enjoy to its fullest. The reason I appreciate it is that it's a return to adventure in a time when a lot of stories were dwelling in trauma.
One would hope you've learned your lesson for the day. Be ready for next time. There will be a test.
Hey everybody, this is Chris. Thank you first of all for watching the episode. I thought I'd do a little bit of housekeeping and sort of talk to you as myself. I wanted to let you know that there is a Facebook page, so if you wanted to discuss comics, if you wanted to discuss the episode with each other or ask questions of me, that's all there. So the link is right down below. So feel free to check that out. I hope you do. A lot of posts that I'll make there about maybe like what's coming up next week or just asking questions about what people are interested kind of helps shape the channel. So if you want to have input, I definitely would recommend checking out the Facebook page. I've also started a Patreon account, and if you don't want to support something like that, that's fine. I'm grateful just to have viewers. You do not need to financially support me. There's no obligation there. But I do the show 100% myself. The research, buying the comics, writing the script, of course, speaking on camera and all the editing and everything. And I don't have a lot of money. So, even $1 or $2 actually helps me a lot. So if you were so inclined, all I can say is I promise that would absolutely go right back into the show. I need to pay for monthly subscription fees to Adobe, for instance. I would love to get some better lighting at some point. This is pretty good. I like this, but I do have big plans for what I could potentially do. And even just getting the comics sometimes can be tricky. And any help would be very much appreciated there. All right, guys, until next week, keep reading comics.